Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought, I gotta check that out. I mean, I'm getting older, sure, but I don't feel like I'm done with, the fun parts of life, like connection and desire, excitement. You don't really find those things at the grocery store or the doctor's office, so I went online. Date My Age made dating an adventure. It gave me a chance to feel like a teenager again. The thrill of seeing someone new and saying, wow. I could send a spicy gift, start a video chat, or just message my compliments to a beautiful woman.
Whether you love, or just like to look, the fun is waiting for you at Date My Age.
Sure, I was skeptical, but Date My Age is safe, secure, and fun.
Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
We've all seen the headlines in the news of how somebody lost their life in an act of cold-blooded murder, and it grabs your attention. But have you ever stopped to think about the life of the person at the center of the news story? These victims were way more than a salacious headline. I'm Eric Carter-Londine, and my podcast, The Murder in My Family, dives into some of those stories to help listeners get to know the person who was lost and how their death affected those closest to them. Listen to The Murder in My Family everywhere you listen to podcasts.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Citizen Detective, and Campus Killings. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Long Island, New York juts out to the east of the teeming boroughs comprising New York City. On its southern shore, pristine beaches and parks along the Great South Bay span its length. Just across the Great South Bay from the southern coast, hundreds of tiny barrier islands dot the water. Several of these barrier islands are habitable and feature long, narrow stretches of beach that have become some of the most sought-after, off-the-beaten-path vacation spots in New York, particularly the more populous Jones Beach Island and the vehicle-free summer hideaway Fire Island. To the south of these barrier islands, the huge Atlantic Ocean. This area of Long Island is a far cry from the glitzy, glamorous beach towns comprising the Hamptons, the Astor and Vanderbilt mansion-studded villages of Great Neck, and the verdant wineries surrounding the upscale, celebrity-dense hamlets like Montauk. Although Long Island itself boasts a population of 7.5 million, these tiny barrier islands along its southern shore are sparsely populated, mostly by summer folk, blue-collar workers, and shellfishers and fishermen. Rustic beach shacks and ramshackle capes make up the vast majority of the homes, amidst the topography composed of dunes, seagrass, thistle, cattails, sand, and saltwater marshes. Retail stores, restaurants, and even gas stations are few and far between. Residents of this area are generally either natives who have grown up in the isolated beach communities and work nearby, or summer people who seek out the rustic feel and privacy of these eastern enclaves, Tobay Beach, Gilgo Beach, Oak Beach, and then Fire Island. Jones Beach, the closest of these southern shore barrier island beaches to Manhattan and the other New York City boroughs, is public, and in the summer often features thousands of people escaping city life, attending large concerts, and packing like sardines onto the soft sand to enjoy a little R&R. Ocean Parkway, constructed in 1933 by a corps of engineers led by Robert Moses, was the result of dredging and fill brought in to connect the small barrier islands and to create the straight, 4-lane highway running the 15.5-mile length of the narrow peninsula. Ocean Parkway effectively connects the city of New York to the remote island communities below Long Island's South Shore. Ocean Parkway commences at the Meadowbrook State Parkway on Long Island in Nassau County, runs through Jones Beach, Tobay Beach, Gilgo Beach, and Oak Beach, and ends at the Robert Moses Causeway at the far eastern end of Jones Beach Island in Suffolk County. Some parts of Jones Beach Island are narrow enough that from Ocean Parkway, drivers can see the beaches on either side. The New York Department of Transportation estimates that about 15,000 cars use Ocean Parkway daily, but at night, its unlit stretch is almost deserted, and any oncoming cars can be seen miles down the isolated, barren road. Most of this somewhat desolate road doesn't even have any guardrail or barriers separating the tarmac from the brambles and seagrass along its edges. This was the setting on Saturday, April 20th, 1996, when a spring evening beach walk turned into a traumatic event for brothers Robert and Andrew Ragona. The brothers were at Blue Point Beach on the bay side of Fire Island, about a mile west of Davis Beach Park, where they owned a Nassau County summer home. A black garbage bag lay on the beach, appearing to have washed ashore. The Ragonas unfortunately looked inside. Wrapped in the plastic, they found 2 human legs with feet. The Nassau County Police were summoned at 7 p.m., and an investigation began into the owner of the legs, which had clearly been severed from a torso by use of implements. Although there was no identification in the trash bag to help police identify the partial remains, investigators gathered quite a bit of information from the legs and feet, whom they believed came from the same person. They belonged to a Caucasian female who had had a recent pedicure with fresh red polish. They couldn't really tell how old she was, giving an estimated age range of 18 to 50, and they couldn't tell how tall she was or what she weighed. They hoped, though, that some medical details they gleaned from her legs would be recognizable to someone. On her right leg, she had a scar on her posterior calf that measured 3.5 inches in length, a 1-inch scar on her shin, and a 1/2-inch scar on the ankle. She also had scars on her left leg, including a 3.5-inch scar on the inner calf and a 2-inch scar with adjacent suture scars on the left ankle. Despite this information and the relative freshness of the remains, attempts to connect Fire Island Jane Doe with reports of missing women in the area failed. Police had no dental records or fingerprints to work with, and there were no unique tattoos or really anything except the scars on the legs to go on. Decades later, police would learn that Fire Island Jane Doe, as she became known, was never reported missing, explaining why that avenue of investigation came up empty. Let's skip ahead 4 years to November 19, 2000, and move geographically toward the eastern end of Long Island. That date was when hunters, walking through a wooded area off remote Halsey Manor Road in Manorville, found the partial skeletal remains of a woman wrapped in plastic bags. She was missing her head and hands, and only estimates of her age and height are available. She was white, 18 to 40 years old, and about 5 foot 2 inches tall. She had no clothing or identifying jewelry of any kind. This Jane Doe, too, remained unidentified and became known as Manorville Jane Doe. Now let's go to 2003. A mile from where Manorville Jane Doe was found in 2000, a person walking their dog in the Manorville woods on July 26, 2003 found the remains of a woman. This time, the woman was not fully decomposed and had been dead only about a week, but she was missing her arms and head. A tattoo on her right hip had been mutilated with a sharp object, and her nipples were, quote, disrupted. The victim was identified as Jessica Taylor, a 20-year-old Manhattan sex worker who was last seen near the Port Authority bus terminal around July 19, 2003. Her other body parts remained missing, and Jessica's case went unsolved. 7 years later, in 2010, Shannon Gilbert, a New Jersey-based young nursing student and aspiring singer who was supporting herself by working as a high-end escort, went missing. Late at night on May 1st, her business partner and driver Michael Pack drove her to the home of John Brewer in Oak Beach, New York, one of the small remote communities along Ocean Parkway. Brewer had seen Shannon's ad on Craigslist and booked her for 2 hours for a cost of $400. Pack, the driver, waited for her in the car while she went inside and met with her client. But something happened to Shannon that to this day remains in dispute. The way Brewer, Pack, and neighbor Gus Coletti tell the story, Shannon seemed to have some kind of psychotic episode, became disoriented, and ran from Brewer's house after calling 911 on her cell phone. The 22-minute 911 call records Shannon saying frantically things like, "Someone's after me and they're trying to kill me." but she was unable to describe where she was, being unfamiliar with the rustic beach community. Shannon darted away in the darkness after banging on Gus Coletti's door asking for help, and she vanished. Her boyfriend, family, and police immediately started looking for Shannon, but she was gone. Searches of the area turned up no trace of her, and they petered out. In addition to the 2,500 police officers on the Suffolk County Police Force, the department at the time had 22 police dogs on its roster. These dogs are German Shepherds purchased from Europe and trained by 2 full-time officers to detect drugs, explosives, or cadavers. Training these dogs requires months of work and practice, with the dogs being rewarded for successful detection of their target object. Months after Shannon Gilbert inexplicably vanished, on December 11, 2010, Suffolk police officer John Malia was working on a training exercise with his search dog, Blue. They were practicing searching along the remote Gilgo Beach area of Ocean Parkway. Malia knew that Shannon Gilbert had gone missing not far from here, and he thought he'd search for any sign of her while putting in training hours with the shepherd. Blue found something. It was the body of a woman. She was intact, nude, wrapped in burlap-like material and duct-taped, but she was not Shannon Gilbert. The remains were a 24-year-old woman named Melissa Barthelme. Melissa had been reported missing by her mother on July 18, 2009. People were desperately looking for her. She had last been seen on July 10, 2009 at her apartment in the Bronx. Melissa was a hairdresser who had turned to sex work and advertised as an escort on Backpage. On the last night she was seen, she went to meet a male client. She told a friend she had an appointment with a John, and she didn't mention his name or their meeting place. Cell phone records showed that Melissa had traveled to Long Island, specifically Freeport, Massapequa, and Lindenhurst. After that, she disappeared. Starting a week after Melissa went missing, her family had been tormented by phone calls from Melissa's cell phone. The first call came on July 17th, with more coming in on July 23rd, August 5th, August 19th, and August 26th. In one call, a man's voice said, "Is this Melissa's little sister? Do you know what your sister is doing? She's a whore." In others, the caller told her sister that he had killed and sexually assaulted Melissa. The frantic Barthelme family pushed police to find Melissa, but they couldn't, until Officer Malia and his dog literally stumbled on her remains on Ocean Parkway nearly 18 months later. A massive search of the Ocean Parkway area where Melissa was found would reveal unfathomable horror. The remains of 3 more women lay within a quarter mile of Melissa. Like her, they were intact, bound, and wrapped. Amber Costello, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, and Megan Waterman were all found on December 13th. Like Melissa, they were all petite women who worked as sex workers who advertised their services on Craigslist or Backpage. Like Melissa, Megan and Amber were restrained by burlap and tape, while the 4th victim, Maureen, was restrained by 3 belts. The women were spaced about 500 feet apart from each other among the scrub brushes on the sandy fringe of beach along Ocean Parkway. They had all been killed by homicidal violence. Megan Waterman, the 22-year-old mother of a 3-year-old daughter, had last been seen on June 6, 2010, at a Holiday Inn Express in Hauppauge, New York, after traveling to Long Island from her hometown in Maine for sex work. She left the motel around 1:30 a.m. on June 6th to meet a client at a convenience store nearby. She was never heard from again, and her failure to call home to check on her daughter prompted her family to report her missing on June 8th. 27-year-old Amber Lynn Costello of Wilmington, North Carolina, became estranged from her second husband and family after developing a heroin habit. She attended a 28-day drug treatment program in Clearwater, Florida, but relapsed, moved to North Babylon, New York, and turned to sex work to support herself and her habit. On September 2nd, 2010, she left her apartment on foot, telling her roommates she was going to meet a client. She was never heard from again and was not reported missing. She was found just 3 months after she was last seen alive. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was a mother of 2 young children whose work as a clerk at a Norwich, Connecticut ShopRite didn't pay the bills. She had turned to being an escort just 6 months before she vanished, advertising on Craigslist and Backpage. The 25-year-old was believed to have taken an Amtrak train from New London, Connecticut to Grand Central on July 6th. She called a friend in Connecticut on July 9th at 11:43 p.m. and said she was going on an out call. This was less common for Maureen. She typically worked out of a low-budget motel while in the city, and then returned home to her family after a few days of work. This time, She went out to meet a client somewhere else, did not return, and did not call. A friend reported her missing on July 14, 2007. There was no sign of her until her remains were found on Ocean Parkway. It was horrifying and unthinkable. 4 missing women, all dumped in a tiny 1/4 mile stretch of desolate highway, clearly murdered by someone who had discarded them after doing what he wanted. On December 14, 2010, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Richard Dormer announced the discovery of Melissa, Megan, Maureen, and Amber's bodies, the so-called Gilgo Four. And Dormer was the first to publicly mention the theory of a serial killer at work. And there was ample reason to suspect a serial killer. This from CBS News, quote, former Suffolk County Chief of Detectives Dominic Varone says there were striking similarities among the Gilgo Four. Very petite, 5 foot or under, 100 pounds, hazel green eyes. He believes the killer may have combed through online ads to target a specific type of woman. Police devoted massive resources to continued searches of the area after pausing for the harsh winter weather. On March 29, 2011, on Ocean Parkway less than a mile and on the same side of the road as where the Gilgo Four had been found, police searchers found a skull, hands, and a forearm that had been severed from a female body. Through DNA testing, police were able to connect these parts to Jessica Taylor, the woman with the mutilated tattoo who had been found miles away in Manorville in 2003. Her other arm has never been located. There were more. On April 4, 2011, a head, hands, and right foot were found in trash bags along Ocean Parkway east of Cedar Beach. The female victim had brown hair, and her nasal bones had been fractured and healed. It was theorized she possibly had a tattoo on her right ankle, as a portion of that had been removed. DNA testing proved that these partial remains matched to another set of remains, those of Manorville Jane Doe, the 5 foot 2 inch tall white woman whose skeletonized torso had been found way back on November 19, 2000, 50 miles away in Manorville. Although her head was now reunited with her body, it bore few clues, and she remained unidentified. The hits kept coming. Near those remains belonging to Manorville Jane Doe, also on April 4th, investigators found the remains of an unidentified female toddler wrapped in a blanket. According to information released by the Suffolk County Police in 2011, the girl was between 16 and 32 months of age and was not white. It was presumed that she was the child of Manorville Jane Doe, as their remains found in 2011 were very close together. Hold that thought, I'll come back to it. As searches continued throughout April of 2011, more partial skeletal remains, extremities but not a skull, were found in the brush near Zacks Bay, off Ocean Parkway at Jones Beach State Park. These remains, too, were matched by DNA to remains found years earlier. On June 28, 1997, a man strolling with his daughter discovered the torso of a black woman stuffed inside a large green Rubbermaid container in the brush off Park Drive at Hempstead Lake State Park in West Hempstead, Nassau County, New York. This victim had been dead for only 3 days, and a tattoo of 2 peaches with a bite out of them was clearly visible on her left breast. For that reason, she became known to investigators as Peaches. Found inside the Rubbermaid tub with Peaches was an old tattered maroon towel and a dark-colored floral pillowcase. Photos of these items have been released. But Peaches was not identified. She was estimated to have been 20 to 30 years old, and she had a cesarean section scar. Somewhere out there she has a child, and at this point that child is at least 13 years old. Then Nassau Homicide Squad Lieutenant William Brosnan, who has since retired, told the Long Island Press in 2010. Well, that was wrong. The toddler found near Manorville Jane Doe's remains was shown by 2016 DNA testing to be Peach's child. She didn't live to be 13, as Brosnan guessed. She was under the age of 4 when she died. 2011 investigators weren't certain what her cause of death was, but in 2016, they revealed that they considered her to be the victim of a homicide. So just to recap this part of the story, Peach's torso was found in 1997, and her extremities were found 14 years later in 2011, 15 miles away. The toddler girl was found in 2011 just 150 feet from Manorville Jane Doe, but she was not the child of that Doe. She was Peach's child. And mother and child had been deliberately separated. As stated by the Long Island Press, quote, Peaches and her child were placed at opposite ends of the dumping grounds, making them the 2 victims who were farthest apart from one another on Ocean Parkway, end quote. They were about 7 miles apart. Peaches and her child remain unidentified. There were still more. About a half-mile east of the bodies of the Gilgo Four, along Ocean Parkway, investigators discovered the remains of an Asian male wearing women's clothing who had been savagely beaten. This from the Long Island Press in 2011, quote, "The Asian male is believed to be between 17 and 23 years of age, approximately 5 foot 6 inches tall, according to Police Commissioner Richard Dormer, with poor dental health. The man was missing his top and bottom molars and one front tooth, and police believe he had been missing these teeth for some time before he was killed. Police say he'd been dead at least 5 years, possibly 10, end quote. Pix 11 reported, quote, "A law enforcement source told Pix 11 News that the male victim's head had been crushed, leading some to theorize that this was a crime of rage," end quote. Many theorized that Asian male was killed by a John whom he duped into believing he was a female escort. Asian male has not been identified. Finally, the last discovery on April 11, 2011. A woman's skull was found on Ocean Parkway, west of Tow Bay Beach in Nassau County. This was about 4 miles from Gilgo Beach. DNA testing connected the skull to Fire Island Jane Doe, whose story we started with, the woman whose legs and feet with red-painted toenails had turned up in a trash bag on Fire Island in 1996. Fire Island Jane Doe's torso and hands were never recovered. That made 10 bodies that had been found along Ocean Parkway, including some whose partial bodies had been found elsewhere. It seemed to tie together all these victims spread over nearly 2 decades. It was astounding, shocking, sickening, all the adjectives. Police floundered, unsure whether these victims were all connected to one killer or whether more than one homicidal maniac was using the same dumping grounds. After all, the MOs seemed different in some of the cases. The Gilgo Four were intact, bound, and were killed in 2007 or later. Some of the others were killed earlier and dismembered and their parts scattered in disparate locations. The toddler was wrapped in a blanket, her mother was placed in a Tupperware, and they both wore jewelry, but none of the others did, and no one could figure out where Asian male fit in. As the Long Island Press summed it up, quote, "Due to the difference in modus operandi between Taylor, Manorville Jane Doe, Fire Island Jane Doe, Peaches, and the Gilgo Four, police initially speculated that this was the work of 2 or more killers," end quote. Nonetheless, the term LISK, referring to Long Island serial killer, was coined and stuck. I have to tell you about an unsolved true crime podcast called Key to the Case. Each week, host Sam takes listeners and her co-host Sean deep into an unsolved mystery, such as the disappearance of Barbara Bolick, an experienced hiker who vanished from the Montana mountains while her hiking partner was just feet away, or the murders of Lisa Guerreri and Brandon Rumbaugh, a young couple who was murdered while sleeping in the Arizona desert. Sam and Sean thoroughly and thoughtfully cover cases that have previously remained out of the spotlight. I enjoyed Key to the Case, and I know you will too. You can find Key to the Case wherever you listen to podcasts.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought I gotta check that out. I mean, I'm getting older, sure, but I don't feel like I'm done with, the fun parts of life, like connection and desire, excitement. You don't really find those things at the grocery store or the doctor's office, so I went online. Date My Age made dating an adventure. It gave me a chance to feel like a teenager again. The thrill of seeing someone new and saying, wow. I could send a spicy gift, start a video chat, or just message my compliments to a beautiful woman.
Whether you love, or just like to look, the fun is waiting for you at Date My Age.
Sure, I was skeptical, but Date My Age is safe, secure, and fun.
Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
In November of 2011, desperate to identify the victims found in the Gilgo Beach area, investigators released sketches of Manorville Jane Doe, who they called Jane Doe 6, and the Asian male, called John Doe 8. They also released photos of Peaches and the toddler's jewelry, although at this time they were not yet proven to be related. This from the Long Island Press, quote, "Police released pictures of the jewelry of the adult female, possibly the mother, consisting of a snake chain bracelet and an XO-style bracelet. The child, possibly the woman's daughter, was wearing a set of gold hoop earrings and a 16-inch gold rope necklace," end quote. Later, the investigators also published photos of the Peaches tattoo in tattoo magazines and were contacted by a tattoo artist who recalled giving a young black woman a tattoo just like that. He said she was in Connecticut from her Long Island home visiting relatives, and she was having trouble with her boyfriend, but he didn't get her name. And then they found the woman who started it all. On December 13, 2011, Shannon Gilbert's skeletal remains were discovered in a tidal marsh near Oak Beach, about a half-mile from where she was last seen running away from John Brewer's house. Some of her personal items like her jacket were found nearby. After an autopsy, the medical examiner concluded that her cause of death was undetermined, and the Suffolk authorities have said that she likely drowned while under the influence of drugs. Her family believes she was murdered. They hired attorney John Ray to advocate for a finding of homicide, and also hired a private pathologist, the famed Dr. Michael Baden, who wrote in his report, quote, "There is insufficient information to determine a definite cause of death, but the autopsy findings are consistent with homicidal strangulation. There is no evidence that she died of a natural disease, of a drug overdose, or of drowning," end quote. Whether Shannon's case is linked to the others remains hotly contested. In fact, in November 2011, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Richard Dormer told NBC New York that he believed all 10 murder victims, but not Shannon, were killed by the same person. Police continue their efforts to identify the unidentified bodies, presuming that if they knew who the victims were, they could progress the case. In 2011, Fire Island Jane Doe was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, known as NAMUS, as UP 9098. Various rule-outs occurred, but she remained unidentified. So did Manorville Jane Doe, whose circumstances were remarkably similar. Over the next few years, the investigations into all these murders was in shambles. I'm not going to get into the December 2015 arrest and conviction of the Suffolk County Police Commissioner James Burke on corruption charges and on later solicitation and exposure charges. But Burke has been blamed for stymieing the LISK investigation by refusing to coordinate efforts with law enforcement in neighboring Nassau County and refusing to permit the FBI to provide assistance. The District Attorney Tom Spoda was also convicted for covering up for Burke. The FBI joined the case literally the day after Burke was indicted. Finally, in 2020, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Geraldine Hart took a new approach, seeking the public's help in the case. In January 2020, she held a press conference releasing photos of a substantial black leather belt. It's embossed with very large repeating light blue letters that say either HM or WH. The font is weird, so it's hard to tell. "We believe that the belt was handled by the suspect and did not belong to any of the victims," Hart said. She wouldn't say which victim the belt was found with, but we know that Maureen Brainerd Barnes was the only one of the Gilgo Four who was bound with belts, so I'd guess it was her. Police also declined to release the belt's size. But I have to say that knowing what we now know about the meticulousness of this alleged killer, I'm surprised he left such a unique, identifiable item at a crime scene. Police continue to work behind the scenes to identify some of the suspected victims of the killer or killers, leaving bodies strewn across Long Island. Once the skull of Manorville Jane Doe was found, composite sketches were released in attempts to generate leads, but nothing led to her name. Well, in May 2020, Geraldine Hart held a news conference announcing that Manorville Jane Doe had been identified by forensic genealogy as Valerie Mack. It was the first time a law enforcement agency in New York State had used forensic genealogy to identify a Doe as part of a police investigation. According to Hart, this was a giant leap forward for the LISK investigation. This meant, of course, that the investigators considered Manorville Jane Doe, now known to be Valerie Mack, as a likely victim of the killer who had slain and dumped the Gilgo Four. The genealogy was done by Lori Giordano, a former Legal Aid Society attorney and counterterrorism agent for the FBI, who pivoted into forensic genealogy after the Golden State Killer was identified using the technique in April 2018. Giordano had the skills as she'd been working as a search angel helping adoptees find their birth parents. She is now a senior agent in the FBI's genealogy unit. She wasn't allowed to talk about the case and the FBI won't talk to me, but Newsday did some journalistic digging. This is all a lengthy quote from a Newsday article on the genealogy. In the case of Mack, her relatives told Newsday that Giordano and the FBI discovered a cousin of the dead woman had a profile in a genealogy database. That led to 2 additional relatives in New Jersey, an aunt who had been the sister of Valerie's long-dead mother and a half-sister. Valerie's aunt Ellen Munnings recalled in a 2022 interview that, in 2019, FBI agents came to her home in South New Jersey unannounced. I thought, "What did my son do?" Munnings said. The agents reassured Munnings that no one was in trouble, but they were inquiring if any of her female relatives might be missing. Munnings told the investigators no one had heard in years from Valerie, whose mother, Patricia Fulton, Munnings' sister, had died some years earlier in Chicago. Before leaving, the agents took a cheek swab from her, Munnings recalled. Since two of Valerie's half-sisters were still alive, Giordano paid them a visit, recalled Tricia Hazen, one of the siblings who lives in New Jersey. In an interview, Hazen said during her talk with Giordano, the agent was told about Valerie and her adoptive family. Giordano then took a cheek swab from her, Hazen remembered. The cheek swabs from Munnings and Hazen were apparently done to confirm the two women's genetic links to Mack. Giordano also was informed that Valerie's adoptive parents, Ed and Joanne Mack, were still living in New Jersey and were interviewed. The Macks recently told Newsday that Giordano, along with some Suffolk County police detectives, visited them in 2019 and told them about the preliminary identification of Valerie. The police interview with the Macks revealed the crucial fact that Valerie had a son as a teenage girl, a young man who was now in his 20s. The son consented to giving a DNA sample, which confirmed Valerie as his mother. "We have our closure," Ed Mack said. Okay, that all from Newsday. Geraldine Hart revealed some more information about Valerie in her press conference. Valerie, born July 2, 1976, in Philadelphia, had been in the foster system and then was adopted as a young girl. She was last seen by her adoptive family at age 24 in the spring or summer of the year 2000 in Port Republic, New Jersey, near Atlantic City, where she was living with a boyfriend. Valerie was working as a Craigslist escort in Philadelphia using the name Melissa Taylor. She had racked up 3 arrests on prostitution charges in Philly. When she vanished, no one reported her missing. It's unknown how she ended up in Manorville, New York, 181 miles away from Port Republic, as she had no known connections to Long Island. Hart said that Valerie's family had 20 years of not knowing and were very thankful when they learned Valerie had been located. Hart's term in office ended, and another new Suffolk County Police Commissioner, Rodney Harrison, who took office on December 31, 2021, immediately started a task force charged with solving the Long Island murders. The task force comprised law enforcement officers from Suffolk County, New York State, and the FBI. It held the first meeting on February 1, 2022, and it took only 6 weeks for this no-nonsense group to see results. During a thorough review of the thousands of pages of case files, investigative reports, and witness statements, task force members made a list of clues they thought could lead to the identity of the killer, and one of them did. Here's what happened. Remember Amber Costello, one of the original Gilgo 4, who was found intact, bound, and wrapped on Ocean Parkway in December 2010. This is all taken directly from court documents with a little paraphrasing. According to witnesses, on the night of September 1, 2010, an escort client arrived at Amber's home at 1112 America Avenue in West Babylon, New York. The client paid her up front, and then Amber and her co-conspirator Dave Schaller pretended that Dave was Amber's boyfriend, who was enraged about what she was doing. He confronted the client and ordered him to leave. Flustered, the client assured Dave that he was just her friend and tell her I'll give her a call, and he walked out the front door. Amber kept the cash. Basically, they ripped him off. Here is a direct quote from the court documents, quote, "Based upon interviews, that client was described as a large white male, approximately 6'4" to 6'6" in height, in his mid-40s, with dark bushy hair and big oval-style 1970s type eyeglasses." Dave Schaller and or Bear Brodsky, who was another of Amber's quote-unquote boyfriends, described the client to police after Amber's disappearance as they questioned them about Amber's final interactions. The witness described the John as appearing like an ogre. Police learned from Amber's cell phone records that a burner phone sent a text message to her phone at 1:18 a.m. on September 2nd, which stated, "That was not nice, so do I credit for next time." There's obviously a typo. The next day, Amber was again contacted by the same client. Dave told the police, quote, "Amber told us that he wanted to see her again, but he didn't want to come back to the house because of her boyfriend."
Every day, predators are targeting children and teens online. The Department of Homeland Security's Know to Protect campaign provides resources to combat online child exploitation and abuse. Learn how you can help protect our kids online and join the fight. Visit knowtoprotect.gov so together we can stop online child exploitation. That's KNOW, the number 2, protect.gov.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought I gotta check that out. I mean, I'm getting older, sure, but I don't feel like I'm done with, the fun parts of life, like connection and desire, excitement. You don't really find those things at the grocery store or the doctor's office, so I went online. Date My Age made dating an adventure. It gave me a chance to feel like a teenager again. The thrill of seeing someone new and saying, wow. I could send a spicy gift, start a video chat, or just message my compliments to a beautiful woman.
Whether you love, or just like to look, the fun is waiting for you at Date My Age.
Sure, I was skeptical, but Date My Age is safe, secure, and fun.
Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
Amber agreed to go meet the client. She left her cell phone behind and left on foot. Moments after Amber walked out to meet the client, Dave saw a dark-colored truck pass the house, specifically coming from the direction Amber had walked towards, end quote. Dave assumed this was the same truck belonging to the ripped-off ogre client. When he'd been at the house the previous day, Dave had seen a first-generation Chevy Avalanche parked in the driveway of the residence. This Chevy Avalanche would break the case wide open. At the time, the Avalanche was a fairly new, distinctive, and less common vehicle. The police already knew, based on Amber's cell phone records, that the burner phone that contacted her with that late-night text was located in Massapequa Park when the text was sent. The next night, September 2nd, when the client contacted Amber again at 9:32 p.m. using the same phone, the phone pinged in Midtown Manhattan. Here's a quote from the court documents. Following this communication and based on the cell site records, the burner cell phone traveled to Massapequa Park and had contacts with the Costello phone at approximately 10:39 p.m. and 11:05 p.m. Cell site records for the burner phone indicate that at approximately 11:17 p.m., the phone traveled to West Babylon in proximity to the residence of Amber Costello. When Amber walked out the door to meet with the client in the dark-colored truck, she was never seen again. Okay, so police knew Amber's client had ties to Massapequa Park, Long Island, and Midtown Manhattan. And now they suspected he drove a Chevy Avalanche. They started running the registrations of all Chevy Avalanches registered in the area and cross-checking the registered owners with connections to Midtown and Massapequa. One man stood out. He was very tall, about 6'4", of heavy build at 240 pounds, with glasses and black hair, and his driver's license and social media showed that he was literally the embodiment of an ogre, just as described by Dave Schaller. This man lived in Massapequa Park and worked in Midtown Manhattan. His name was Rex Andrew Heuermann. They had a bead on a prime suspect 6 weeks after the LISK task force first met. According to Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney, after they first learned the name Rex Heuermann on March 14, 2022, quote, "From that point on, we used the power of the grand jury, over 300 subpoenas and search warrants, looking into this individual's background," end quote. Those 300 subpoenas and search warrants yielded a lot of information about Heuermann, which I'll get into in a bit. The more police looked into him, the more convinced they became that he was the elusive LISK. They started surveilling him and his family. On July 21, 2022, they snagged his household garbage from outside his First Avenue Massapequa Park home. 11 empty bottles were collected and sent in to compare against DNA found with the bodies recovered in connection with the LISK investigation. They continued to tail Heuermann and watch his family and gather information to build a case against him. In the meantime, the investigators wanted to see if they could tie Fire Island Jane Doe, now a suspected victim of the Long Island serial killer, to their suspect. But first they had to identify her. Quote, "In August of 2022, approximately 6 months after we formed this Gilgo task force, a DNA profile suitable for genealogical comparison was developed from the remains," District Attorney Tierney said. In September of 2022, the FBI was able, via a genetic genealogy review, to identify Karen Vergata presumptively as Fire Island Jane Doe, he said, just as she had with the identification of Valerie Mack. Lori Giordano of the FBI did the genealogy work. The identification was confirmed by comparison with the DNA of a direct relative of Karen's. The identity of this person hasn't been released, but I suspect it was one of her 2 sons. Newsday did a long piece about who Karen Vergata was. This is all adopted from their coverage. Karen Vergata was last seen alive on February 14, 1996, when she was 34 years old. She was living in an apartment on West 45th Street in Manhattan, and like the other identified victims, she was working as an escort. Karen was born on November 4, 1961, to parents Dominic and Ann Vergata. Her brother, Victor, was 4 years older than she. She was raised in Glen Head, a hamlet on Long Island. Karen was diminutive, weighing under 100 pounds when she was fully grown, and she suffered from scoliosis. A photo released of her shows her smiling with pigtails and freckles. Her father owned a lucrative business with an estate at the time of his death valued at over $2 million. Karen attended North Shore High School, where she was known as quirky and artsy, wearing floppy hats and costume jewelry. She loved the Fleetwood Mac song Gypsy and was called Pumpkin by her classmates. She graduated from high school in 1979. Her yearbook page reads, "Thanks, Dad, love ya." Her mother died 2 years before Karen graduated, and although it sounds like Karen had a good relationship with her dad, you have to wonder if Karen would have spiraled downward had her mom been around to support and guide her. After graduation, Karen drifted, moving around cities on the East Coast and beyond, supported by her father and picking up a drug habit. She was arrested in 1983 in New Orleans on drug charges, and again in 1984 in Connecticut, where she was required by the court to attend drug treatment programs. By 1986, Karen was living in the Shore Haven Apartments in Brooklyn, New York, and was in a long-term relationship with a married man. The 2,000-unit apartment complex where she lived was built by Fred Trump, the former president's father, and managed by a man named Gunther Hugo Lind, a German immigrant to whom Trump had taken a liking. It was with this guy, Lind, that Karen was having an affair. They had met sometime in Brooklyn. Lind remained married with his wife, Lynette, who knew about Karen. She was hurt, but maintained to Newsday that her husband had a heart of gold. Karen and Lind had 2 sons together, and Lind housed his second family in the Trump complex he was the resident manager for. This is all a direct quote from Newsday. Vergata became pregnant with Gary in 1988 while still dealing with a major drug problem. 5 months pregnant, she walked across the busy Brooklyn-Queens Expressway near the Williamsburg Bridge, where she was struck by a car. Vergata suffered a broken right leg, ruptured spleen, and other injuries. A lawsuit resulted in Vergata being awarded a $90,000 settlement for her injuries. Court records revealed she was on methadone treatment at the time of this accident. Gary was born premature 2 months after the accident at Bellevue Hospital with cerebral palsy, and there was concern his congenital condition was somehow caused by the accident, court records showed. After the accident, Vergata and Lind remained together, and she became pregnant with Eric, who was born in 1990. But with Vergata facing continuing drug and psychological problems, she had to give up custody of both boys, end quote. Eric and Gary were adopted by Diane and Edward Doherty, who initially served as their foster parents. Their mother, Karen, visited them in Wisconsin, Long Island when she could, and had a good relationship with her kids. The kids also maintained occasional contact with their father until he died in December 1991 at age only 50. After that, Karen was in bad shape. More from Newsday, quote, "From December 1991 until late 1994, Vergata was arrested 11 times in New York City, mostly on charges of loitering for prostitution, but twice for drug possession, court records show. The resulting sentences were either time served, short stints of community service, or relatively short jail sentences, none of which appeared to act as deterrents. By September 1994, the Dohertys had adopted Gary and Eric in a final order from Suffolk County Judge William Kent. Vergata visited the boys, and those family visits were warm and friendly, Doherty recalled. Vergata was arrested for the last time in New York City in November 1995 on a drug charge and sentenced to a week in jail in 1996. Dominic Vergata spoke to his daughter for the last time on Valentine's Day 1996 when he told authorities she called him from jail. His daughter often called him on holidays and special occasions, usually asking for money. After that final call to her father, Vergata's family lost contact with her. Court records showed that on March 12, 1996, Vergata missed a court date, and a bench warrant was issued for her arrest. Dominic hired a private detective to look for leads and also tried to file a missing persons report with the NYPD, but was unable to do so. After not hearing from his daughter for nearly 20 years, Vergata's father filed a surrogate court action in 2015 to have her declared legally dead. The court issued such a declaration in October 2017. Dominic Vergata died in 2022, and his will stated that he disinherited Vergata for reasons good and sufficient to me, end quote. All that from Newsday. So Dominic died thinking that his daughter had cut him out of her life. Her sons, Gary and Eric, thought so too. They were shocked by reports that their mother had been found in parts in 2 separate incidents on Long Island, a decade and a half and miles apart. Eric told Newsday it was, quote, a major relief that it wasn't her choice to leave. He and Gary received Karen's cremated remains and intend to bury her in a family plot where they too will be interred. Okay, so Karen Vergata was identified and the investigation into Rex Heuermann marched on, and major progress was made. It turns out that quite a few hairs suspected to belong to the killer of all these women had been found with their remains. The Suffolk County Crime Lab was able to recover a male hair from the bottom of the burlap used to wrap Megan Waterman's body. Back in 2011, testing on the hair had shown that the male who dropped the hair was a Caucasian, but that's all they could get. But in July 2020, a forensic lab was able to obtain mitochondrial DNA from the male hair recovered on the Waterman burlap. Quote from the court documents. Specifically, Forensic Laboratory Number 1 determined that this hair belonged to a male in mitochondrial haplogroup V7A. End quote. Now, in 2022 to early 2023, the LISK team was surveilling Rex Heuermann. On January 26, 2023, a surveillance team following Heuermann watched him discard a pizza box into a garbage can located in front of 385 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. I'll post photos of perhaps the world's most famous pizza crust. More from the court documents. On or about June 12, 2023, Forensic Laboratory Number 2 was able to determine as to the male hair on Waterman and the swab from the pizza crust that the mitochondrial DNA profiles are the same, specifically at a rate that would, as per the EMPOP database, exclude 99.96% of the North American population from the male hair on Waterman, end quote. Luckily, a footnote in the court documents explains what this MPOP database is all about. Quote, MPOP is shorthand for the European DNA Profile Group Mitochondrial DNA Population Database, which is a web-based collection of human mitochondrial sequence data from various populations worldwide. The North American database includes 12,386 sequences of North American forensic significance, end quote. All this basically means that the hair and the DNA on the pizza crust matched enough that the investigators were now pretty sure they had the right guy. The investigators decided to move on Heuermann rather than waiting to amass even more evidence because they learned through subpoenaing his phone records that as late as 2023, he was still contacting sex workers and using massage parlors, and they were concerned that he would kill again. They obtained an arrest warrant and surprised him at his Midtown Manhattan office at 385 Fifth Avenue on July 14, 2023. They handcuffed the giant man who towered over the officers, and he was led peacefully away. The charging documents allege that he murdered 3 of the Gilgo 4, Melissa Barthelemy, Amber Costello, and Megan Waterman. The charges were based on the DNA from the hair on Megan Waterman, but they also had cell phone evidence. All 3 women had had contact with someone shortly before they disappeared who was contacting their phones from a burner phone. You'll remember that Megan Waterman was last seen alive at the Holiday Inn in Hauppauge, New York, on June 6, 2010, around 1:30 a.m. The day before, on June 5th, her phone was contacted by a burner cell phone, which had just been activated that day. A quote from the court documents. Thereafter, the Waterman phone communicated with this burner cell phone on June 6, 2010, at approximately 1:31 a.m., which is around the time Megan Waterman was captured on video surveillance exiting the Holiday Inn in Hauppauge for the last time. Following that communication, the burner cell phone had no further phone activity. However, cell site records show that the Waterman phone traveled to Massapequa Park, with the last cell site location being in Massapequa Park at approximately 3:11 a.m. in the vicinity of the residence of defendant Heuermann, end quote. Amber Costello was the victim who had tried to stiff the ogre-like client driving the Chevy Avalanche. Amber was last seen alive on September 2, 2010, leaving her house to meet with the same guy. That evening at 9:32 p.m., Amber's cell phone had been contacted by a burner cell phone that pinged in Manhattan. Quote, based on the cell records, the burner cell phone traveled to Massapequa Park and had contacts with the Costello phone at approximately 10:39 p.m. and 11:05 p.m. Cell site records for the burner phone indicate that at approximately 11:17 p.m., the phone traveled to West Babylon in proximity to the residence of Amber Costello, end quote. And that was when Amber walked out to meet the client, and Dave saw a dark truck pass by. And then the Melissa Barthelmy cell phone evidence. In Melissa's case, you'll recall that her suspected killer had used her phone to call and torment her family for several days after she vanished. Investigators managed to trace the calls to both Midtown Manhattan and Massapequa early in their probe, which is how they knew where to look for Avalanche owners. The same burner cell phone had contacted Melissa's phone on July 3rd, July 6th, July 9th, and July 10th, 2009, which was the last day she was seen alive. This from the court documents, quote, on July 10th, 2009, cell site records indicate the burner cell phone traveled from Massapequa Park to Midtown Manhattan. Later that evening, the Barthelemy cell phone traveled from Midtown Manhattan to Massapequa, with the last cell location being in Massapequa on July 11th, 2009, at approximately 1:43 a.m. On July 11th, 2009, Miss Barthelmy's cell phone was used to make an outbound call checking her voicemail from a cell site location in Freeport. On July 11th and July 12th, the Barthelmy phone made 2 more outbound calls, checking her voicemail from cell site locations in Babylon. On July 17th, July 23rd, August 5th, August 19th, and August 26th, 2009, the Barthelmy phone made taunting phone calls to Ms. Barthelmy's family members, some of which resulted in a conversation between the caller, who was a male, and a relative of Melissa Barthelmy, in which the male caller admitted killing and sexually assaulting Ms. Barthelmy. The cell site locations of the Barthelmy phone during these taunting calls were all in Midtown Manhattan, end quote. So Melissa's phone was going back and forth between Massapequa and Manhattan, and so was the burner phone. Heuermann's American Express card records verified that he was in the same general location at the same times as the burner phone calls, and his own cell phone records and surveillance footage from a cell phone retailer tied him to the burner phones. Okay, and this part is really important. They also had cell phone, credit card, and travel records showing that Heuermann's wife and kids were out of the state or the country when Melissa, Megan, and Amber vanished. This was crucially important because Amber Costello had been found bound by 3 pieces of clear or white duct tape. Some of this tape was on her head. And when Amber was examined, a female human hair was recovered from a piece of tape on her head. This was all inside the burlap wrapping, so there was no way this hair had gotten onto her at the dump site. Megan Waterman had also been bound by clear or white duct tape. When Megan was examined, 2 female human head hairs were recovered from the tape on or near her head. Hairs were also found on Maureen Brainerd Barnes, which I'll get into a little later. Court records reflect that in July 2022, the forensic lab analyzed these female hairs and determined each belonged to a female individual in mitochondrial haplogroup K1C2, and that this female was not any of the victims. And this is significant because DNA from one of the 11 drinking bottles taken from the Heuermann household trash also came from a female belonging to mitochondrial haplogroup K1C2. Additional testing by a second forensic lab determined that, quote, the mitochondrial DNA profiles are the same at all compared positions common to and between samples, specifically at a rate that would, as per the MPOP database, exclude 99.98% of the North American population from the female hair on Costello. The number for the hair on Megan was 99.69%. So the upshot, quote, it is significant that Rex Heuermann's wife cannot be excluded from the female hairs recovered on the remains of Megan Waterman and Amber Costello. As previously noted, defendant Heuermann's wife was out of state at the time of Ms. Waterman and Ms. Costello's disappearance and murders. As such, it is likely that the burlap, tape, vehicles, or other instrumentalities utilized in furtherance of these murders came from defendant Heuermann's residence, where his wife, Asa Ellerup, also resides or was transferred from his clothing, end quote. On the day of Heuermann's arrest, July 14, 2023, members of the LISK task force met with his wife, Asa Ellerup, as well as his daughter, Victoria, and stepson, Christopher, and obtained buccal swabs on consent from each of them. Megan Waterman's hair analysis was updated in the Maureen Brainerd Barnes bail application in early 2024. There is a quote, recently, Forensic Laboratory Number 1 was able to generate DNA sequencing data for the 2 female hairs on Waterman and subsequently conducted a 1-to-1 autosomal nuclear DNA comparison between said profiles to Asa Ellerup's SNP genotype profile, which resulted in the following conclusions. First, with regards to the hair recovered from the outside the head area of Ms. Waterman, the DNA profile generated from said hair is times 2.374 times 1,048 times more likely to have come from a person genetically identical to Asa Ellerup's SNP genotype file than from an unrelated individual. Second, with regards to the hair recovered from the tape of the head area of Ms. Waterman, the DNA profile generated from said hair is 2.778 times 1,048 times more likely to have come from a person genetically identical to Asa Ellerup's SNP genotype file than from an unrelated individual. Amber's hair analysis was updated as well. The investigative team had followed Rex Heuermann's adult daughter Victoria on the Long Island commuter rail and grabbed a sample from her. Quote, recently, Forensic Laboratory No. 1 was able to generate DNA sequencing data for the female hair on Costello and subsequently conducted a 1-to-1 autosomal nuclear DNA comparison between said profile to Victoria's SNP genotype file, developed from the Monster Java can, which had been discarded by Victoria on May 25, 2023. This resulted in the following conclusion. The DNA profile generated from the female hair on Costello is 4.654 times 1,063 times more likely to have come from a person genetically identical to Victoria's SNP genotype file than from an unrelated individual. End quote. What all this means is that hairs from Victoria and Asa, Heuermann's daughter and wife specifically, were on some of the bodies. And those two were out of town when the women were killed. It was beginning to look more and more as though Rex Heuermann lured female escorts to his family home and killed them there, while his unsuspecting wife and children were on vacation.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought I gotta check that out. I mean, I'm getting older, sure, but I don't feel like I'm done with, the fun parts of life, like connection and desire, excitement. You don't really find those things at the grocery store or the doctor's office, so I went online. Date My Age made dating an adventure. It gave me a chance to feel like a teenager again. The thrill of seeing someone new and saying, wow. I could send a spicy gift, start a video chat, or just message my compliments to a beautiful woman.
Whether you love, or just like to look, the fun is waiting for you at Date My Age.
Sure, I was skeptical, but Date My Age is safe, secure, and fun.
Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
So who is Rex Andrew Heuermann? Heuermann was born on February 12, 1964 in Long Island, New York. Until his arrest, he was an architect and consultant known for his comprehensive understanding of New York's building code. He owned his own company, RH Consultants and Associates, which had some major clients like Catholic Charities, some New York utilities, and American Airlines. There is a video of him available online in which he was interviewed by a filmmaking crew and joked about his cabinet maker's hammer being persuasive and getting results. It's creepy as hell now that we know what's being alleged about him. Heuermann grew up on Long Island in the house he and his second wife, Asa, their daughter, and Heuermann's stepson still lived in when he was arrested. Many neighbors noted that for a well-respected architect, the house was a rundown eyesore. Heuermann was not friendly with the neighbors, some of whom said he glowered at them and seemed menacing. When police raided his home, they found that Heuermann had a secret room in the basement where he stored over 200 guns. He had secret email accounts on his burner phones and used those accounts to conduct more than 200 searches in 2022 and 2023 for serial killers and for references to the LISK cases. Searches like, why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? And currently active serial killers. Heuermann also had a Tinder account under a fake name. Under a fake email account using the name Thomas Hawk on one of the burner phones tied to him, he searched for a large number of incredibly disturbing so-called porn sites, including the terms girl begging for rape porn, pretty girl with bruised face porn, torture redhead porn, old janitor's gangbang little schoolgirl porn, tied up and raped porn, and Asian twink tied up porn, which I mentioned because of the unidentified Asian male found near the Go-Go victims. Anyway, you get the point. Heuermann also searched for hundreds of images and stories of some of his victims, particularly Melissa, Maureen, and Megan. Heuermann pleaded not guilty to the 3 murder charges. A superseding indictment was filed on January 16, 2024, also charging Rex Heuermann with the murder of Maureen Brainerd Barnes on or about July 9, 2007. Maureen was the 4th of the Gilgo 4. A hair was found on Maureen, too, trapped in the buckle of one of the 3 leather belts strapped around her body when she was found. This hair had been examined back in 2010, but all the lab was able to determine was that the hair owner was Caucasian. Now, quote, recently Forensic Laboratory Number 1 was also able to generate DNA sequencing data for the female hair on Barnes. Forensic Laboratory Number 1 was then able to conduct a 1-to-1 autosomal nuclear DNA comparison between said profile to Asa Ellerup's SNP genotype file, which resulted in the following conclusion. The DNA profile generated from the female hair on Barnes is 7.9 trillion times more likely to have come from a person genetically identical to Asa Ellerup's SNP genotype file than from an unrelated individual, end quote. That's pretty definitive. To be clear, prosecutors do not believe Asa Ellerup was involved in the murders. As the superseding indictment states, Heuermann's wife was out of state during Maureen's disappearance, just as she was with the other 3 Gilgo victims. But as I mentioned, Asa's hairs being found on the tape, burlap, and bodies of the victims seems to point to the possibility that these women were killed in the Heuermann home. The cell phone evidence also supported the conclusion that Rex Heuermann killed Maureen. From the court documents, quote, Maureen Brainerd Barnes was last seen on July 9, 2007 in New York City. On July 6, 2007, Ms. Brainerd Barnes' cell phone was contacted by a burner cell phone. Between July 6th and July 9th, there were 16 interactions between this burner phone and Brainerd Barnes' cell phone. On July 9, 2007, the last cell site location for the Brainerd Barnes cell phone was at approximately 11:56 p.m. in Midtown Manhattan near the 59th Street Bridge. Thereafter, the Brainerd Barnes cell phone had no further activity until July 12, 2007. On that date, 3 days after her disappearance, 2 outbound calls were made from Brainerd Barnes' cell phone, checking her voicemail from a cell site location near the Long Island Expressway in Islandia, end quote. Islandia is a hamlet on Long Island, 24 miles from Massapequa. Maureen's phone was in Long Island 3 days after she vanished from Manhattan. The bail documents and indictments lay out some of the other evidence against Heuermann. The task force discovered another email account for Heuermann using the name Andy Roberts. Andrew is his middle name. This email account conducted thousands of searches for more horrific sites involving sex slavery, medieval torture of women, BDSM, and skinny escorts. The email account also searched for hundreds of articles about the LISK murders. Police seized Heuermann's laptop and were able to retrieve all sorts of things, including things he tried to hide or delete. The laptop showed that on September 1, 2010, at approximately 9:03 p.m., Heuermann had accessed Amber Costello's Backpage ad. This was right before she and her co-conspirators stiffed Heuermann out of his money. Quote, 2 hours later, at approximately 11:33 p.m. and 11:34 p.m., a burner phone linked to Heuermann contacted Amber's phone. During those communications, the burner cell phone connected to cell towers in West Amityville and Massapequa Park. Thereafter, the burner cell phone indicates travel to West Babylon in proximity to the residence of Amber Costello, and again had contact with Ms. Costello's phone at approximately 12:05 a.m. on September 2, 2010, which is when witnesses describe an individual, now known to be the defendant Rex Heuermann, arriving at the Costello residence. The task force's discovery of a direct link between Rex Heuermann and Ms. Costello's Backpage ad just hours before defendant Heuermann met with Ms. Costello further solidifies that defendant Heuermann was the John who was the subject of the ruse on September 2, 2010, and therefore was the same John who returned later that day to pick up Mrs. Costello prior to her disappearance and murder, end quote. The updated January 2024 charges also beefed up the evidence in Megan Waterman's case. They already had tied the 2 female hairs found on her to Heuermann's wife and daughter. Now, the male hair found at the bottom of the burlap she was wrapped in was sent to a forensic lab which, quote, was able to generate DNA sequencing data for the male hair on Waterman and subsequently conducted a 1-to-1 autosomal nuclear DNA comparison between said profile to Rex Heuermann's SNP genotype file, developed from an extract of the napkin contained within the pizza box, which resulted in the following conclusion, quote, the DNA profile generated from the male hair on Waterman is 1.408 times 10169 times more likely to have come from a person genetically identical to Rex Heuermann's SNP genotype file than from an unrelated individual. On or about August 16, 2023, Suffolk County District Attorney's Office detective investigators had finally been able to obtain a buccal swab from Rex Heuermann at the Suffolk County Correctional Facility. It matched the pizza crust DNA. Now it's known for a fact whose hair was found on Megan Waterman's burlap wrapper, Rex Heuermann's. Nonetheless, Heuermann again pleaded not guilty to the updated charges. In June 2024, the charges against Heuermann were again amended to add 2 new homicide charges for the murder of Jessica Taylor on or about or between July 21 to 26, 2003, and the murder of Sandra Castilla on or about November 19th to 20th, 1993. You'll remember Jessica Taylor. Her torso was found in the Manorville Woods in July 2003. She's the one with the mutilated tattoo who was identified right away. Other parts of her were found along Ocean Parkway on March 29, 2011. Jessica, an escort, had last been seen at 10:22 p.m. on July 21, 2003, when she'd made a 2-minute outgoing call on her phone. She was never seen again. Rex Heuermann worked in the same area of Midtown Manhattan that Jessica frequented, and cell phone records proved that he was in Manhattan on the date that Jessica was last heard from. Not only that, his family was out of town. A male human hair was found on Jessica's body and preserved. This from the recent court documents. On or about April 29, 2024, Forensic Laboratory No. 1 issued a report indicating it had developed a nuclear DNA profile for not only the male hair underneath Taylor, but also from Rex Heuermann's buccal swab. Forensic Laboratory No. 1 was then able to conduct a 1-to-1 autosomal nuclear DNA comparison between said profile from the male hair underneath Taylor to Rex Heuermann's SNP genotype file developed from his buccal swab, which resulted in the conclusion that the DNA profile generated from the male hair underneath Taylor is 1.837 times 10 to the 603rd power times more likely to have come from a person genetically identical to Rex Heuermann's SNP genotype file than from an unrelated individual, end quote. The other victim Heuermann's recent charges attributed to him was a woman killed all the way back in 1993, the earliest suspected victim to date. She was 28-year-old Sandra Castilla, born on August 25, 1965. Sandra, who hailed from Trinidad and Tobago but had been living in New York before she was killed, was found by 2 hunters traversing a wooded area in North Sea, New York, on November 20, 1993. The woman's body was lying on her back with her arms over her head. Her shirt had been pulled up to expose her breasts and her naked legs were spread. Sandra had been stabbed in the face, torso, breasts, left thigh, and vaginal area. Thank goodness the New York authorities had retained 3 hairs found on Sandra's body in 1993. From the court documents, quote, the DNA profile generated from a male hair on Castilla, which was recovered from Ms. Castilla's mutilated remains, was determined by a forensic lab analysis to be 4.347 times 10 to the 332nd power times more likely to have come from a person genetically identical to Rex Heuermann's SNP genotype file than from an unrelated individual, end quote. And this is interesting. One of the hairs found on Sandra was female. Based on the date on which Sandra had been killed, 1993, the investigators who were tearing Rex Heuermann's life apart knew that he had been in a relationship with another woman at the time, and she had moved out just 2 months before Sandra was killed. I don't know if this was his first wife or a live-in girlfriend. Anyway, the investigators obtained a buccal swab from this woman. They had the forensic lab they were using run DNA comparison between her buccal swab and the female hair. Here are the results. Quote, the DNA profile generated from the female hair on Castilla is 4.578 times 10 to the 1040th power times more likely to have come from a person genetically identical to the unnamed female romantic partner's SNP genotype file than from an unrelated individual, end quote. Isn't it great that in the end, it's hairs from women that are nailing Heuermann to the wall?
Every day, predators are targeting children and teens online. The Department of Homeland Security's Know to Protect campaign provides resources to combat online child exploitation and abuse. Learn how you can help protect our kids online and join the fight. Visit knowtoprotect.gov so together we can stop online child exploitation. That's KNOW, 2, protect.gov.
Again, Heuermann pleaded not guilty to the new charges against him, But the evidence keeps racking up, and that's only the evidence we're being told about. For example, 350 electronic devices in all had been removed from his home and office. According to the bail application document, an analysis of these devices has revealed Heuermann's significant collection of violent, bondage, and torture pornography, currently dating back to 1994. The pornographic images accessed by Heuermann include, but are not limited to, breast mutilation, vaginal torture, sex substitution, i.e. penetration with an object, the sexualization of decapitated women, bondage, and whipping." End quote. Okay, so watching torture porn does not make Heuermann a murderer, but police found an incredibly incriminating document hidden on one of Heuermann's computers found in his basement. This was a document created in the 2001 to 2002 timeframe. As the bail application states, quote, "The task force members believe the Microsoft Word document to be a planning document utilized by Heuermann to methodically blueprint and plan out his kills." End quote. The document contains items listed under 4 categories: problems, supplies, DS for dump sites, and TRG for target victim, where it says small is good. Things listed under supplies include duct tape, electric clips, saws, rope, and hairnets. Remember that the hairs found on the bodies were almost all not Heuermann's, but his family's. Under dump site is listed Mill Road, referring to the area of Mill Road and Ocean Parkway where some victims were found. There are also categories for pre-prep, prep, and post-event that include things like obtaining burner phones, building reinforced tables and suspension mechanisms, hanging drop cloths, burning gloves, changing tires, checking for surveillance cameras on Long Island roadways, and destroying computer files. As for the bodies, Heuermann's notes remind him to wash them, remove tattoos and torture marks, remove the head and hands, and package them for transport. In the Things to Remember section, there are notes indicating steps to take next time. Things like consider a hit to the face or neck next time, or using a heavier rope for the neck. The light rope broke under stress of being tightened, it says. Heuermann further notes the importance of sleep, to not only avoid problems, as he puts it, but also to increase what Heuermann refers to as playtime. And the ultimate shocker, Heuermann's document contains page references to John Douglas's book Mindhunter, where it discusses penetration with foreign objects and mutilation. A copy of Douglas's book, The Cases That Haunt Us, was found in Heuermann's home. According to the New York Times, after the hidden planning document was located, investigators returned to Heuermann's home to look for physical evidence consistent with the manual. Quote, "Investigators had already scoured the home after Mr. Heuermann's arrest last summer, but they returned in May with an infrared light and spent 6 days searching the paneled walls and drop ceiling of the basement for signs that Mr. Heuermann may have used tape and pushpins to hang drop cloths to conceal violent acts as suggested in the manual." End quote. There was more. This all from the bail document. Quote, "A forensic analysis of Rex Heuermann's digital devices also revealed the following: that on or about July 28, 2003, Rex Heuermann accessed a Newsday article entitled Cops Seek Help in IDing Manorville Body regarding the discovery of Ms. Taylor's human remains. That online activity was subsequently deleted. 2. On or about July 29, 2003, Rex Heuermann conducted an internet search for a new Chevrolet Avalanche, despite his 2002 Avalanche being just over 1 year old." End quote. This search was because the Newsday article reported that investigators had found a witness who, on July 25, 2003, at around 10:30 p.m., had seen a dark-colored Chevy pickup truck backed into the location where Jessica Taylor's body was found hours later. Heuermann knew his truck had been spotted, and the Avalanche indeed turned out to be his downfall. Oh, and all the DNA. One thing that has not been mentioned by charging documents is whether the initials on that belt, photos of which were released in 2020, are of anyone connected to Heuermann. This is from the New York Post. Quote, "Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney told Newsday, yes, there was WH or HM on the belt. The last name is Heuermann. There are ancestors with WH, so assign to that what you will," Tierney said. Although the DA did not elaborate, the initials WH match Heuermann's grandfather, William Heuermann, who died in 1964, end quote. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the man Rex Heuermann is and the monster he's suspected to be. Police believe that the sexual sadist and killer planned his kills, lured escorts to their doom, tortured and slayed them in the basement of his home while his family was away, and dumped them all over Long Island, some of them in different areas. He has been operating methodically and lethally since as far back as 1993 and has continued to hone and refine his methods. Prosecutors have charged Heuermann with the murders of 6 of the women they've been able to link to him. What about the others? Did Heuermann kill Karen Vergata? He has not been charged in her murder, but the circumstances of the last part of her life and her death and disposal certainly mirror those of other known victims. Police have indicated that Karen is considered one of the victims attributed to the LISK, but they have yet to charge Heuermann in her murder. Perhaps they lack any forensic evidence that links him definitively to her slaying, or perhaps they're still working on it. But there is one witness who has alleged that she believes she saw Karen Vergata in the company of Rex Heuermann. The unnamed 54-year-old woman recently signed an affidavit to the Gilbert family attorney, John Ray, that states the following, quote, "I believe that great harm came to that woman I believe to have been Karen Vergata when she was at the Heuermann home in Massapequa Park, New York, on or about Valentine's Day in 1996, end quote. The witness's affidavit details what she says happened. In early 1996, she was dating a New York City police officer whose initials are RW. He soon became a detective on the force. The two were swingers and frequented a 300-plus member swingers club known as Trapeze in lower Midtown Manhattan. Members would post contact information on a wall at the club to invite hookups. Quote from the affidavit, either Rex Heuermann or his wife Asa posted contact information for them in a house in Massapequa Park to engage in swinger sex in 1996. I and RW chose to go there to the Heuermann home in February 1996. RW picked up a woman I believe to be Karen Vergata in New York City on the way to the Heuermann house. She was hungry and homeless. She sat in the back of the car. When we stopped for gas, she said she was scared. I told her not to be scared because RW was a cop. We entered the Heuermann home. It was in the night. Inside the house, it was dark. The affiant goes on to detail that the woman she believes was Karen went downstairs while she herself stayed upstairs with Heuermann's wife, Asa. She did not know where RW went during that time. Quote, Asa told me words to the effect that Rex brought her from her country and that everything she has, he has given to her. She said that she was lucky he was rich. She said she was also afraid of Rex. I do not know if she was being truthful. End quote. As she and RW were leaving, the woman she believed to be Karen suddenly ran outside naked and ran by the garage. Quote, RW told me not to worry about her, that she was okay. They were only playing a game. We left without her. I felt uneasy. The affiant said she came forward because she saw Rex Heuermann on TV recently and also saw a picture of Karen Vergata and recognized her as the woman whom they had brought with them to Heuermann's home. She said, quote, I was shocked and deeply sorrowful for having left her behind at Heuermann's house. In October 2023, John Ray, the attorney who represents the family of Shannon Gilbert, released this affidavit as supporting evidence that Heuermann killed Karen Vergata. Ray has been trying to convince Suffolk County authorities that Shannon Gilbert, the sex worker who disappeared after running away and calling 911 in Oak Beach, is a LISK victim. We know there are some inconsistencies presented by this witness statement. Every single murder that Heuermann has been charged with, the police have connected to a period in time when his wife was out of town or he was living alone. Here, the affiant alleges that Asa was home and was involved in swinging with her husband. We don't know if what this woman alleges was true at all, but it does not rule out that Karen Vergata was Heuermann's victim. First of all, we know that Karen Vergata got out of jail right around Valentine's Day of 1996, which is right around when this is all alleged to have happened. We know that Heuermann contacted a number of his victims more than once and met with them more than once. Perhaps Karen got comfortable with him and being in his house, and he lured her back to his home later when his wife went on vacation with their kids. I personally think that the circumstances of Karen's death and disposal are too similar to some of Heuermann's other victims for it to be a coincidence. And now we know, based on Sandra Castilla, that he was killing back in the 1990s when Karen died violently at the hands of someone else. What about Valerie Mack? Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison told Newsday that he had assigned additional task force investigators to the Mack and Vergata cases. Newsday reports, quote, officials also linked the death of Valerie Mack, another Gilgo Beach victim, for the first time to Heuermann. Although the former Manhattan architect has not been charged with the death of Mack, whose body was found in Gilgo Beach, prosecutors indicated in court documents that her manner of death was similar to Sandra Castilla and Jessica Taylor's, end quote. Valerie Mack's body was dumped close to Mill Road, which is mentioned as a dump site in the planning document on Heuermann's computer. DA Ray Tierney has stated publicly that Rex Heuermann is a suspect in Valerie's murder, and that the team is working to put together their case. "We're not going to stop," he said. "We can't stop. We owe that to the victims. Whatever we need to do, we're going to do it." Even farther behind in being linked to Heuermann are the 3 victims who remain unidentified. They are the Asian male and Peaches and her baby. We don't know if these homicide victims are connected to Heuermann or not. The first priority remains figuring out who they are. In 2022, the FBI hit a wall with the forensic genealogy they had undertaken to try to identify Peaches. They released a photo of her tattoo and asked for the public's help in naming her. In 2022, the Mobile, Alabama Police Department posted on Facebook, quote, "The FBI is seeking relatives and friends of Elijah Lige Howell, or Howard, 1927 to 1963. Mr. Howard lived in Pritchard, Alabama with his wife Carrie and passed away in Mobile, Alabama in 1963 with Ms. Lily Way Miggins Packer. His relatives may be able to assist in the case of a woman and child found in another state. If anyone has any information, please call 1-800-FBI or www.tips.fbi.gov. So as you can hear, the massive case against Heuermann is developing. No one thinks it will go to trial in 2024. Investigators are still gathering and testing evidence. For example, investigators recently again searched his home, and they also seized a dark green Chevy Avalanche he owned at the time the Gilgo Four were killed. He had transferred title to his brother Craig in South Carolina in 2012. That truck had to be examined with a fine-tooth comb. And of course, other victims may be revealed. The charges against Heuermann are all allegations at this point. He's entitled to a vigorous defense and his day in court. But from what I've seen, the evidence against him is overwhelming. It's horrifying to think of the numbers of lives this man ended, and unbearable to consider the pain and suffering he inflicted on his prey and their family members. Many of the killers I cover on this show turn out to be banal, the murders that commit the result of some kind of base, animalistic impulse. Dumb luck prevented their discovery. Heuermann is different. He is a true serial killer, with all the connotations of those words: methodical, organized, targeted, cunning, sadistic, narcissistic, prolific. In other words, the stuff nightmares are made of. After he was arrested, he reportedly inquired whether his arrest was making headlines. He thrives on this. May all his victims, however many there may be, and police are conducting searches on and around a property he owns with his brother in Chester County, South Carolina, and are investigating trips Heuermann made to New Jersey and Las Vegas, rest in peace. This will be the final DNA ID episode before my summer break. The show will be back in mid-August. I'm taking some time to spend with my family, but I also need time to prepare episodes to air in late summer and fall of 2024. In the meantime, if you're one of the bad guys, they're coming for you. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to DNAIDpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.